Thanks everyone for taking some time today. We're here because each year here at Regrow, we update sustainability insights with a new year of crop data. And alongside these updates, we evaluate opportunities to enhance Regrow models so that we can increase the accuracy of crop and practice observations and the impact of these practices and crop observations on emissions. And so today we wanted to share some of these updates to the models that are coming in 2025. It will be incorporated into your 2024 new year practice data as well as previous years of practice data. And just a quick introduction here. My name is Jacob Talbot. I lead marketing here at Regrow. I'm joined by John Shriver, our Director of Data Science, and Xenia, who is our Staff Product Manager for Sustainability Insights. John and I will be leading the presentation today, and Xenia will be here to answer any questions that come up along the way. So we got three main things we want to cover. First, I'm going to do a quick look back on some of the product innovations we've had for Sustainability Insights over the past 6 to 9 months or so, just to make sure everyone knows about some of the exciting things that we've been launching. I'll share the mic over to John, and he'll go through the 2025 data enhancements, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions. You can add any questions into the bank on the bottom right as we go along here. We'll take these in real time after the fact. And if you have any questions after the event, we're of course always here, so please reach out to your account teams. We'll make sure we're able to answer any questions that you have now or in the future. Cool. So just a few updates that I wanted to call out. Around summer or so of last year, we launched spatial exploration. This is a feature that enables you to take all of those KPIs that you use in your sustainability reporting functionality and then visualize these directly in your supply shed. So what we're looking at here on the right is a view of a supply shed in the Midwestern US. You can see details all the way down to the county level, and we have similar spatial resolution in different parts of the world. And what this allows you to do is get that view of all those KPIs like cover cropping, emissions, tillage, land use, land change, all those things for your supply shed, and then unearth additional insights that you might not catch just by looking at some of the raw data itself. So this is for doing things like identifying hotspots of emissions and also just looking at some of the trends over time so you can see how some of your investments in regenerative agriculture or just how different trends across your different landscapes might be taking place over the course of multiple years. We've been hearing from customers as they've been using this that some of the use cases that work really well are both doing some of this trend analysis, but also really working internally with stakeholders. So if you're trying to work on explaining to stakeholders that are less close to some of your programs what the impact of your programs are or where there are opportunities, or if you want to share these externally with some of your stakeholders up and down the value chain, these are some of the things that customers have been getting a lot of value from with spatial exploration. Next one, this is a newer one. So just about a month or so ago, we launched the latest iteration of our planning functionality called Plan AI. And what we're doing here is taking all of our visual resolution of cropland around the world, applying machine learning to it to understand where all of the opportunities for regenerative agriculture are in supply sheds, then constraining this into the areas that you're looking at in your programs and helping you surface the highest opportunities for regenerative agriculture investments. So some of the things you can do are actually forecast what abatement potential there is if you were to invest in regenerative agriculture in different regions. So we surface the best opportunities, and then you can look out to 2030 to see what it would look like if you had growers adopting new practices in your supply sheds. You can stack rank these according to your goals. So whether it's total greenhouse gas emissions, total acres impacted, or even the budget that you want to apply to regenerative agriculture. One additional feature that's really exciting here is we brought in the functionality to look at the ROI of your investments as well. So we've imported from our experience running programs some realistic cost projections and adoption scenarios. And then you can also bring in your own assumptions around things like internal cost of carbon, alternatives like offsets. So you can compare the cost of running a regenerative agriculture program to your alternatives and then look at what the ROI of investing in regenerative agriculture would be over time. Again, a key benefit we're hearing from customers here is both doing some of this analysis to inform their own programs and investments, but then working with stakeholders internally and externally. So making the business case with your teams at your company or organization, as well as working with your supply chain partners or other partners in regenerative agriculture to really lay out what the opportunity is for regenerative ag. Last thing I wanted to call out, now this one is brand new, just from the last couple of weeks. So we've added the functionality to bring in your sourced volumes into sustainability insights. And the two key things that I wanted to call out here. First is you can take your sourced volumes from different regions and then calculate things in your reporting tab, like total GHG emissions for your various source regions, as well as do volume weighted EFs. So if you're sourcing X tons from one region and Y tons from another, and they have different emissions factors, you're able to reflect what the total weighted average EF is for your downstream reporting. The other thing that's exciting is you can bring these volumes into your planning functionality with Plan AI. So if you wanted to rank your opportunities for regenerative agriculture, not just based on total potential in a given region, but actually where you're sourcing from, so that you can reflect, so that your plan for regenerative agriculture will reflect where you're actually sourcing crops most densely, you can do that as well. So a lot of exciting stuff happening. If you're interested in learning more about any of these tools, please reach out to your account teams. We would love to talk with you about how you can make use of these in your programs. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to John for detail into our updated models.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, though I think I know most of you on the call, my name is John Schreiber. I'm the director of our data science team at Regrow. We oversee all of the modeling to get us the actual crop practices that we see on the field. So what crops are grown, what practices are associated with the production of those crops. I want to give a couple of updates on the models that we've been using to generate the data behind sustainability insights. I've listed them here and we'll walk through them one by one, but I think in general, these are some really good improvements that really, I think, both increase the precision and granularity of what we've been reporting, but also then how it can be used in a way that's more effective for some of the decision-making processes that I think you all are making. On the next slide, just to remind everyone kind of generally what the process is, we're using third-party data, mostly satellite imagery, weather data, soils data, to then identify fields across the agricultural landscape, so throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. Once we have those fields, we understand, or we use our models to identify the crops that are being grown on them, when they were planted, when they were harvested, where they're using cover crops. And all of that data goes into our DNDC model to actually then get us the changes in soil carbon over time and any greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with the production of those crops. And that's what's used for the outcomes that you actually see in sustainability insights. Today, we're going to mostly talk about the models under the monitor column there, because that's where most of the changes have been made. The version of DNDC and everything that we're using is exactly the same this year as it was last year. So the changes that you see in your outcomes are really driven by the changes in practices more than anything else. So that's where we will be spending our time. On the next slide, we can start to talk through some of these in more detail. The first thing that I want to talk about is really the way that we are associating crops and practices for the actual accounting of greenhouse gases emissions and the practices that are related to those. So previously, what we've done is use more of an agricultural year to group everything together. So over a growing season, we'd look generally from the fall to the fall, I think it was October to October, and then we'd group all the practices that we see on a field with the commodity that was harvested at the end of that growing season. What we've started to do is really start to focus much more on the individual commodities that are being produced on a field. I think the biggest place that you'll see an impact with this is with double crops, where previously using that more calendar year driven approach, we had to group various double crops together and report on only one of the commodities and sustainability insights. What we're able to do now, though, is really break things out. So when you see a double crop on a field, say winter wheat followed by soybeans, we can talk about the practices associated with each of those commodities separately, and then the change in the terms of the greenhouse gases associated with those commodities individually as well. Where previously we had to pick one and then lump all of the changes that we saw or all of the emissions with one of those commodities. So on fields that are producing only one commodity within a given year, so say a field that only grows corn, you won't really see a change with this. It's really in fields where you're seeing two commodities being grown and on some winter crops, where we're going to see much better grouping of these regenerative agricultural practices with the commodity itself, and then better accounting for the emissions associated with each of those commodities in the final SI dashboard. On the next slide, one of the key things that I think allowed us to do this is really the way that we determine the plant and harvest date. So the way that we like to actually report things is in line with kind of standard LCA best practices, is between the harvest of one commodity crop and the harvest of the next commodity crop. So again, to go back to that cornfield example that I used earlier, what we do is we actually look at the harvest of whatever crop was on the field prior to that corn, all the way through the harvest of that corn crop, and we look at all the practices in between. The real linchpin for us behind the scenes, in terms of how we do this, is actually determining the harvest date of those crops and then the planting date of those crops. And so the harvest and plant dates are what we use both for that cultivation cycle accounting that I just talked about, but also for how we determine when to look for a cover crop on a field, when to look for tillage that happens prior to planting or post-harvest. And so by changing the way that we actually identify the plant and harvest dates, it's really allowed us to improve the accuracy of our models, not because the models have changed so much, but because we're just looking at the field at the right time. And so the way we did this is really to go away from using standard kind of green curves that we interpret, looking for the emergence signal in, say, an NDVI plot, and the senescence signal in that NDVI plot to identify planting and harvesting, towards something where we actually annotated thousands of fields and then use that to train a machine learning model to identify those periods more precisely, especially when we had cloud cover or other things that made it difficult for a human observer to pull that out by themselves. So I think this is a really positive step in terms of how we're able to identify what's happening on a field and when it's happening, and then the implications of all those agronomic choices that the grower makes for when we then determine what happened on the field throughout a growing season and over time. So one of the places where we saw the improvements to that plant and harvest date change is really with cover crops. So some of the feedback we've gotten on cover crops over the last couple of years is really around how we identify greenness on a field. So when we're looking for that greenness on a field, and then how we interpret the greenness in terms of is it a cover crop or not. So one of the things that we did, I mentioned this earlier, is change the way we report when there's double crops. We've always been able to identify when it's a winter crop versus when it's a cover crop, but this really allows us to break that out in fields where there's double cropping. So much better reporting of cover crops on double crop systems. The other thing we've done is that we've changed the way we actually report greenness on the field so that we now provide a KPI that shows when there's some green cover on the field that may not be enough to really go to the level of an effective cover crop from a soil carbon perspective. But we still want to be able to show that there's more greenness on the field than you would expect if it was, say, just bare soil. So in the two examples we have here, we have this potential cover crop, which we characterize as really having weak emergence. By using a more NDVI-based approach for our field greenness measure that we report in the SI dashboard, you can see when there's a lot of greenness on within a supply shed that may not actually be associated with a full, robust cover crop that's really doing something from a soil carbon perspective. And so we report the cover crop and then the greenness on the field, both through the dashboard, so you're able to see that, and that we are then able to better quantify for those full shoulder season cover crops where are they taking place and what crops are they associated with. And as a result of the changes that we've made to the model, what we saw is a 7% increase in our cover crop determination accuracy when comparing it to our ground truth data that we've sourced at the field level. So observers actually looking at a field, we saw that 7% accuracy using the new method and approach. Similar to what we did for cover crop, what we wanted to do with our tillage algorithm is really think through how do we take the agronomic information we have about that field and use it to best determine the tillage intensity that that field experiences. So some of the feedback that we got over the course of the last year was that using these fixed thresholds of 0 to 30 for conventional till in terms of the residue cover that's on the field, 30 to 60 for reduced till, and then 60 or higher for no-till, that may work very, very well for a crop that generates a lot of residue, something like a corn crop. But when we're looking at something like soybeans or we're looking at something like cotton, you either have just much less residue generated or that residue can break down much more quickly. So what we've done is that we've adjusted the way that we actually determine tillage intensity by looking at the crop that generates the residue on the field. So if I have a corn crop planted in 2024, we actually look at the 2023 crop to see, what was generating that residue. And depending on the actual residue generation of the crop that generated the residue, we determine is it a fragile crop from the crop residue perspective, or is it something that generates a smaller amount of residue, or is it something that is either very robust or generates a lot of residue? And depending on the crop residue that's on the field, we actually apply a different set of thresholds when we determine the tillage intensity. So for a commodity crop that follows something that's very fragile, something like soybeans or winter wheat, or something like cotton that just generates much less residue, we apply a different set of residue thresholds for that tillage intensity. On these fields, what we're looking for is 0 to 15% for a conventional till, 16 to 30% for a reduced till, and then anything greater than 30% residue on the field when that planting takes place, we call that no-till. And what we found is that by adjusting our tillage intensity thresholds for those fragile crops, we are much better aligned both to the agronomy of what's happening on the field, but then also to our ground truth. So we saw an 8% increase in the accuracy. Again, when we look at that ground truth data that's collected by observers that actually visit fields, we saw an 8% increase in our tillage determination accuracy across all crop types in the United States. And on the last slide here, I just want to talk a little bit about then how those changes have impacted the way that our data aligns to some of the public data sets that are out there, especially the USDA Ag Census. So Ag Census every 5 years releases some pretty good information about practices that growers are putting in place on their fields. Again, this is done by a survey, so depending on federal funding and other things, you may get various degrees of cover in certain locations versus in other places, or the degree of rigor that goes into actually assessing the results that come out of those surveys. But in general, what we expect is that the regrow data that you get every single year should tell a similar story to what we're seeing from some of these other data sets that are large enough and comprehensive enough to give us a good understanding of, say, how no-till is being adopted in certain parts of the United States. After making the adjustments to our tillage algorithm and our cover crop algorithm, one of the things that we saw was just much greater alignment in the years where US Ag Census has data and Regrow also has data between the stories that are being told. So thinking about the trends in terms of cover crop adoption or no-till adoption over time, these are just much more aligned now than they were previously as we've taken some of these agronomic considerations into account. So I think that this is a really good sign. And though, again, Regrow, I think, is doing something different in terms of our approach using remote sensing, reporting on an annual basis, doing something different than what USDA does, which is much more survey driven. I am really glad to see that the story that these two data sets are telling is much more in alignment than it was previously. So I think this is another good sign that the adjustments we've made are really helping us get a good landscape level view of these practices. And with that, Jacob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, John. So I just wanted to provide a quick view into what's coming next. So you've heard some of the updates that we've made to our models over the last year. And what you can expect is these will be landing in Sustainability Insights instances for all of you in April. And your account teams will be reaching out to schedule time to review these updates in detail vis-a-vis your actual instances, the places that you're tracking Sustainability Insights, and how these updates have influence the data outcomes that you see. So with that, we are available now for any questions you have. I haven't seen any come through yet, but we'll hang on for a few minutes. And there's also a link here to a knowledge base article that goes through all these same updates that John shared in written format. So that will be shared with you in a follow-up along with this recording post-fact. We've got one question here that just came in. So taking this in real time. Question is, what if a main crop is grown in rotation with a non-cash cover crop? Using the new crop year approach, how are emissions accounted for and how are they allocated between the two, if at all? You're muted.
Awkward. That's a really good question. So the way that we try to group things is that when we look at a cash crop followed by a non-commodity cover crop, that cover crop is associated with the commodity crop. And so if we have something like a winter rye that is then precedes a corn crop, that corn crop will get the credit for the sequestration that is associated with that winter rye. And so the way that we actually like set our cultivation cycle is that we look at when the commodity crops are harvested, and then we group the practices between one commodity crop harvest and the next commodity crop harvest. So what we want to do is really associate the non-crash cover crops with the following commodity, because that's the regenerative agricultural practice that's associated with the production of that commodity.
Great. Thanks, John. give folks just a few more seconds to ask a question here. This is not your last opportunity. As I mentioned, if you have any questions after this, we are always here to answer them. So please feel free to follow up with us. Okay, great. Well, seeing nothing coming through, why don't we go ahead and give some time back? Appreciate you all taking time to join us today. And as I mentioned, we'll follow up with sending this recording, sending the knowledge base, and your account teams will be in touch in April as you get all these updates in your instances. Thank you again, and look forward to talking with you again soon.